Hey everyone, Kevin here, aka The Geek, and I am here to talk about the DFSArmy.com Domination Station Optimizer, the world's premier optimization tool, the best, the easiest to use, the most badass in existence. And one of the things that comes up a lot is tournament mode. What is tournament mode? Why is it here? What does it do? A lot of people don't like to really know these things. They see buttons, they don't care. But you should care. Tournament mode is awesome. And basically, tournament mode is something that I came up with to solve a problem. And I'm going to show you that problem here real quick. So here we go. I'm looking at today's slate on FanDuel, and here's the issue. When you sort by fantasy points per dollar, let's say we have 2 or 3 players that are exorbitantly values on this slate, right? So let's run 10 lineups with 2 uniques, and look what happens. All 3 are going to show up together all 10 times. They should be 100%. They should be 100% owned, right? So has Isaac, Daytona Day. Actually, they didn't come in 100%. So let's work with this. All right. So basically, the issue is this. Tournament mode is designed to work with max exposure settings in particular. And here's how it works. Let's say we're going to set a couple of different players at massive values right now. So Mario Hezonja is already a massive volume with the 6.45 fantasy points per dollar. We're going to set his minutes to 40 just to prove a point here. Okay, now I'm going to take Jonathan Isaac, the second highest projected value. I'm going to set him at 40 as well. And I'm going to set this guy at 40 as well. And the reason is I want to show what happens when you run any sort of optimization tool with massively outsized value players. They're all going to show up at 100%. So as you see, Hez, Daytona Davis, and apparently Westbrook is a big... our system always loves Russell Westbrook, so that's just is what it is. We can't fix that. But as you see here, all 4 of these players show up 100% of the time in 100% of the lineups. So one of the things we talk about in DFS Army is setting exposure limitations, right? So I might say, well, yeah, Hez is a great value today, but I'm running GPPs and I don't want this guy in every single one, so I'll put him at 50%, right? And I'll put Jonathan Isaac in 50%, and I'll put Daytona Davis in 50%, and I'll put Jarrell Martin at 50%, right? These guys are all the ones, I guess, showing up as 100. What's going to happen when you run it in optimal mode is they're going to show 100% of the time and then stop. And it's going to drop all the way down to 50, as you can see here. So what happens is these 3 players, whoever they were, Isaac, Davis, Hezonja, here we go. Isaac, Davis, Hezonja. They show up in the first 50% of lineups generated, and then they completely stop and show up in nothing. So in these bottom ones, you have none of them. Not any single one of them is showing up at the last lineups generated. Right? So this is a problem. Basically, tournament mode is designed to solve the issue of setting exposure maximums where the 2 players will show up together in the first 50% of lineups that you generate and won't show up in the next at all in the next 50%. So my goal with setting an exposure max with these 2 players, let's say, wasn't necessarily to have them together in 50%. So basically, if I make 100 lineups, 50 of them will have them both together and 50 of them will have neither of them. That is a problem, and that has bothered me. It's one of the reasons why, rather than use exposure max settings early on, I would really try to mess with the projection itself to force the tool to sort of more evenly distribute each player. But we've come up with a solution called tournament mode. Now with tournament mode, what we have is a rear-looking algorithm that says basically when you set a player at 50%, it looks back, and if that player is in more than 50% of the previous lineups to the current one, it will not use them. So your first lineup, okay, it's going to take all of these guys, right, and use them. second lineup, since there's just two, and it's only allowed to use that player in 50% of lineups, it will not use him, because using him there would be 100% of lineups. Then in the third one, yes, because it's 50%. So it's a weird looking thing that forces the tool to spread player exposure throughout all of the different lineups. Now, one of the tricks with tournament mode is you should really try not to set them all the same. The idea of setting global exposure max at a certain level is really not something anybody should do ever. You should be setting your exposures individually. But let's say a guy like Mario Hezonja today. Let's say I want to own him 85%. Technically, between you and me, I'd have this dude 100%. But 80% for today. Now, Jonathan Isaac, I don't know what his deal is. I don't know why he's, super exciting. So I'm going to set him at 45%, right? And Daytona Davis, big time value play, could bust. So we're going to go 65%, right? And we're going to make 30 lineups with this crew just like that. And I want to show you how it ends up working out. You know what? Let's make more lineups so I can scroll down there and show it to you as it's happening. But what you're going to see is as this exposure bar is doing its thing, let me set Russell Westbrook too, because he's throwing off the whole game with the obsession with Westbrook. So let's set him at 35%. And what you're going to see is as these lineups are being generated, these players, their exposure amount will never go over the number that we have set here for any of them. And what that means as it's generating is it's mixing them in throughout the entire subset of lineups. So let's take a run and show you how this works. This is, again, optimal mode. You see 100%, 100%, 100%, and then it's going to drop. It's already dropping for Westbrook down to 35. Let's abort that. And now I'm going to show it to you what it looks like in tournament mode. But you see, in optimal mode, it shows them 100% initially up until it hits their max, and then it stops using that player. When we go to tournament mode, watch how this looks. Totally different. All right. In this case, Hezonja always staying below 85. Daytona Davis always staying right at 65. If you go down, you're going to see Westbrook hanging around at 35% the whole time. Right? He never goes over or under. I'm going to run it again so you understand this. But if you look at the lineups themselves, they're mix and match. They're not all together in every single lineup. The first couple, you see a few of them together, but then you'll see ones with with Hez and Daytona, but other ones you'll see without both of them in the same lineup together, or one but not the other one. Now, part of the reason, as you're looking at here, is they're sorted by fantasy points. So, in this case, the best fantasy points, because I jack them up so high, are when they're all together. But in general, you'll see that they don't show up together. So the idea of tournament mode is it specifically works with max exposure setting to force the algorithm to not use the player in certain lineups just for diversification purposes. I hope this makes sense. One thing I will say is I always use tournament mode. There's never a time when I'm generating multiple lineups. I don't use it for, generating optimals or cash lineups or anything like that, because there's no real need for forced diversification when you're doing that. But anytime I'm mass entering, meaning making 10 or 20 or 150 lineups of anything, I always 100% of the time use tournament mode, and I set my exposure maxes where I want my exposure for each player. Now, some people ask me, how do you know how much of a player exposure you want? Well, guys, there's no formula for that. That's what you got to figure out. I can't tell you that. There are times when I play guys 100%. I will tell you today I would play Hezonja probably 90 to 100%. Sometimes players pop up that have a chance to be bad chalk, super values, but maybe they're bad chalk. Maybe it's not Daytona. Maybe it's Ivan Rabb night, not Daytona Davis night tonight. You know what I'm saying? Like, these value plays that pop up, they don't always work. Like Sindarius Thornwell. Is he this player that I want to have 100% exposure to? I don't think so. So you have to make decisions. And with exposures, different players have different ideas of how to set up exposures. Some people want to do more diverse and kind of keep it under 50% for every player, or under 40%. And others believe in going all in on certain players. I'm definitely of the mind that you have to go all in a few spots, or at least heavy ownership in one or two spots. But for me, I have to have a reason for it. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, this is how tournament settings work. It's an awesome solution to a problem that I personally had with all optimizers before we came up with this, where setting max exposures really stopped using the player in optimal mode. It will just use them in the first 50% and not use them. So it didn't spread them out. And if I had two players with high projections value-wise, and I had 50% max exposure, what ended up happening is I get 50 lineups out of 100, 50 with the two of them, and 50 with neither of them. And that's not what I want. I want 25 with the both of them, 25 with just one, 25 with just the other, and 25 with neither. That's a nice even distribution. It gives you what you want. Having 50% with neither of them, with my two chalk plays, that's a disaster if one goes off and the other one doesn't. And that's what we're trying to account for. So I hope this really explains it. I hope you all are using tournament mode every time you mass multi-enter, because if you're not, you're doing it wrong. And I hope you're using the max exposure setting every time you mass multi-enter, because if you're not, you're doing it wrong. And I don't know how to be more clear about that. All right, guys, kick some ass. And anytime there's questions, hit me up in Slack. You know where to find me.